So it's weird. It's weird because I don't really quite understand how exactly this this makes sense to Crowder. Is this like a thing with a very subset of people who watch Crowder of a very specific political persuasion in which they are still absolutely obsessed with George Floyd? I'm very confused. Now, for I would say probably the majority of people on the planet, the George Floyd situation is something that while we still remember it and it still means quite a lot and had a very large impact on society, most people aren't sitting there like thinking, what would be very relevant to talk about today in 2022? Let's talk about George Floyd. Okay. Well, this is from the Crowder Clips channel, where Steven Crowder... basically, they chop up some of Steven Crowder's long-form content and try and make it into more easily digestible. This is called Wikipedia Won't Tell the Truth About George Floyd from Louder with Crowder. Now, somebody asked the real question in the chat, who is the Matrix Man? I don't know. I don't know. It's not a good look for him. It's not good. It's not good.
The next topic is George Floyd. Now, keep in mind, remember how there was some disagreement over his primary cause of death. No one here is saying that there wasn't some kind of police misconduct. No one here is saying that it didn't necessarily also act as a confounding factor to the death. But
you know that whole thing. Now, I don't always agree with the sentiment, but there's that whole thing of like, if you say a bunch of things and then follow it with but, everything that you said before doesn't really matter. I don't think that's necessarily true, and I get kind of frustrated when people just automatically say that. However, then there are often times where I think it is incredibly relevant, and in this case, I think this is 100% the case. As far as people that had any discrimination or disagreement over what caused George Floyd's death, that was political pundits, not forensic scientists, not people who like that's literally what they went to college for, and it's their career and what they spend, their lives doing. They didn't have much of a disagreement. So anyway, yes, he is wearing a Walther shirt. Yeah, Walther's it's an okay gun brand, and they're okay. All right.
There absolutely was some disagreement over the primary cause of death.
Yeah, between you and other, people who for some reason fetishize this case and can't stop fucking talking about it. But sure, whatever.
So, the Wikipedia article dismisses the other more likely primary causes of death if you watch the court case. For example, advanced heart disease, fentanyl, COVID-19, which will take us to the COVID-19 page in a little bit. Again, in the spirit of consistency. So Wikipedia wrote the medical examiner found Floyd's heart stopped due to...
while he was being restrained, and that his death was a homicide caused by...
quote, law enforcement, subdual, restraint, and neck compression.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out... Okay, he skips almost the whole fucking thing. Hang on, he skips almost the whole fucking thing. This is so fucking sneaky, dude.
Quote, law enforcement, subdual, restraint, and neck compression.
Where does that even... Okay, I'm looking. Okay. Caused by cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement, subdual, restraint, and neck compression. Okay.
Though fentanyl intoxication and recent methamphetamine use may have increased the likelihood of death.
And then... a second autopsy commissioned by Floyd's family also found his death to be a homicide, specifically citing asphyxia due to neck and back compression. It ruled out that any underlying medical problems had contributed to Floyd's death and said that Floyd being unable to speak while under Chauvin's knee does not mean he could breathe. So okay, you can post that and then just, ignore most of it. That's totally fine. May have increased the likelihood of death. Okay, sure. Let's, in this case, in this case, let's steelman his argument and say that if we're going by that one, it may have increased the likelihood of death. Okay.
Of death. Now, to give you some context, on the other side of the coin here, the prosecution, right? They tried to debunk the idea that drugs played a significant role or even a primary role in George Floyd's death, claiming that Floyd's body, I don't know if you remember this, had processed a lot of fentanyl, so it couldn't have been an overdose because he had taken it likely over a long period of time. Okay.
Why does he show the full quote and then just ignore half of it? Because he's a fucking propagandist. He's a lying piece of shit. That's why.
So, our change to the article on Wikipedia revealed a huge hole in their argument. Let me read it to you. The prosecution's point fails to consider that a person who dies of overdose may have also consumed and processed the substance on more than one occasion, i.e. prior to the potentially fatal dose, and relies on the presupposition that there was only one administration of fentanyl.
So what they tried to add to Wikipedia was maybe there was more than one administration of fentanyl. But do you have evidence that that was the case? And also, why are you editing Wikipedia?
Now, there's nothing that can be argued about that.
Of course there is. Did you prove that he had taken fentanyl more than once that day? Or, like, what the fuck, dude?
Medically. And if you've watched the trial, you know that these arguments were made on both sides. So again, we're talking about neutrality.
Yes.
Wherever you line up.
The idea that this is fucking neutral. You just literally made something up as a hypothetical, and you can't argue against this thing that you just created out of the blue. Okay, all right.
You need to include these points of view, and you certainly need to include arguments made on the legal record and with medical substantiation. Wikipedia took it down. What did they say? Quote, there is strong consensus against this content. Now, here's what's so scary about that. Strong consensus. Okay. Who determines consensus?
The majority. Like, oh, God. Okay. This is something that drives me fucking crazy. This is what's so fucking bizarre. Before we even get to, like, the largest argument with why this is such a fucking a bizarre non-issue, and he's just trying to, like, fucking tug at the dicks of people who are like, I always knew that he was no angel, blah, 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 blah. Stupid shit. Consensus is because of the problem declaring something as a fact or a law, right? Like a scientific law, right? For example, when we talk about science, you can have things like the theory of evolution, okay? Well, we don't have a law of evolution. We don't. It's only a theory. But evolution is still a fact. We can observe that it happens. We have witnessed evolution happen. It is a fact. It is a fact. It fucking happens. But can we prove in every single instance? Then no, we can't make it a law of evolution. A law has to be something that cannot be there can't be even a possible hypothetical that there's a problem with it. That's why most laws are specifically things like physics, things provable by math, okay? So in that regard, that's a very large example. But when we talk about, like, consensus, scientific consensus, legal consensus, these are things that are largely dictated and determined by the overwhelming body of people that observe it, look at it, test it, and come to the same conclusion. That's what a consensus is. So what is a consensus? People. Hopefully, experts. That's the idea. Now, is it 100% perfectly, foolproof? No. Is it the best? Yes.
Let's discuss on any issue. By the way, that's still Truth Zero.
Wikipedia 4.
So Wikipedia has 4 Wikipedias.
Well, also, just that response, though, is so blanket and not an answer or reason.
And this is what they do, right?
Are you questioning the nature of reality there, Morpheus?
They say strong consensus against this content. Well, okay, first off, there are certain areas where consensus matters. For example, theology, philosophy.
What?
Consensus might be on the results of a scientific experiment, right? The
Sure.
interpretation of the results.
Yeah.
However, consensus doesn't determine science. It could be the consensus that the Earth is flat.
Actually, it does determine science. Yeah. And in fact, the consensus is the thing that then you necessarily have to continually challenge. That's the whole point.
Somewhere in the world at some point in time. The truth is that it's not. Right? There could be some kind of scientific consensus, for example, that Florida would have been gone in 2013. Or all of the predictions that we've gone through from an inconvenient truth. The science, the truth, shows that it's not. Here it says there's strong consensus against this concept. Well, who determines consensus? Who determines consensus on what?
Are you a forensic examiner? Did you perform an autopsy on George Floyd?
Wikipedia. The same people who determine consensus on Facebook, Google, Twitter, and by the way, these people who determine consensus, these are the same people who determine the fact checkers that are used in legacy media. So what's scary is when you have a very small group of people who are forming a consensus, and then they are saying no opposing point of view from outside of our consensus is allowed because we've already achieved consensus. This is the most terrifying.
That's not what anybody ever says. That's not what anybody ever fucking says.
Response you can get, because that's a response that can be used for anything, and it's a response that Wikipedia, or in another case, Facebook, YouTube, Google, Alphabet, could use for any issue.
Well, just to gain control and to get your agenda out.
Another system of control. Another layer to the matrix.
Yeah.
It really has nothing to do with... That's absurd.
Well, consensus says you're absurd.
Well...
Hearing the voice that is attached to Neo over there, I can confidently say if Reddit was a person, I'm sure it would be him.
My consensus says I'm not.
I don't have any. What do we do?
I have consensus
consensus
parties
versus
every
consensus.
Thursday. They're very consensual.
Well, I don't need your consensus.
That's not funny. So anyway, the main thing that I wanted to take away from this is that here. So this entire argument, the whole reason why Chowderhead here is making these fucking arguments is because he wants to cast doubt. And I don't even know why he's doing it now. Who fucking cares at this point? It's over. It's over. Chauvin's fucking gonna rot in prison, and good. Fuck that dude. But the whole point is to try and put away or to feed into this narrative of, one, the liberals, the left, are trying to control, and two, that if he wasn't on drugs, he wouldn't have died. Even if he was on fucking drugs, if he hadn't had a fucking, like, knee put on his neck, and, murdered, then he would be alive. The point is not to focus on whether or not he was on drugs. The point is to focus on the fact that he got murdered. A cop straight murked him. Just saying. Absolutely bizarre. Yeah, for Crowder, it's like, yo, I'm against the authority of this consensus, but authority, when it wears a badge is good, actually. And yes, I did see that earlier. I do remember when Crowder had a dude lean on his shoulder to show how George Floyd didn't die from the cop kneeling on his neck. Yeah, Crowder's a fucking disinformation agent. He's a fucking lying piece of shit. Nothing's new, and in fact, he's gotten way worse over the years. Imagine my shock.